Yes, we are joined by the Treasury Secretary of the United States, Steven Mnuchin. Nice to have you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
A lot of response, of course, to the proposal that was put out last week, the one-page proposal. Many of it saying we don't get it, in the sense of the deficits that are seen potentially being created as a result of the significant cut in rate could never be made up, some say, by the economic growth that you see it creating. I know you differ in that, but Ben Bernanke, for example, this morning saying, I'll take the under on 3% GDP growth. So many others do. What gives you the confidence that this plan can actually do what you say? What evidence are you basing that on?
Well, let me first say, we think that it is critical that we have economic growth. And there's really three parts that will drive that. The first is tax reform. This will be the most sweeping tax reform we've ever had. The second part is regulatory relief. We can have sound regulations, but make sure we have proper regulations. And the third part is fair trade, renegotiating the trade deals. And we think those three things together will create sustained economic growth of 3% or higher. And it'll take some time to get there. But we think that by unleashing the economic opportunities in this country, that we can do that. And tax reform is a major part of that.
Now, I realize this has not been scored by many. Of course, we don't have the details, but at the same time, plenty of nonpartisan watchdogs have weighed in. And I've looked at it this weekend in preparing for our conversation here. 3 trillion, 5 trillion, 6 trillion in deficits created over 10 years. Are you not concerned that that would be the case?
Well, let me first say that most of the people who model these plans have not modeled it because they realize they don't have the details. So we thought it was important to put out the core principles. I've been working with the president for over the last year on the economic plan, and we've been talking about tax. We thought it was very important to put out the principles. And the principles are simplify personal taxes, middle income tax cut, and make our businesses more competitive. We have one of the most uncompetitive business tax systems in the world. And in return for simplifying it and lower taxes, we're going to cut back on lots of deductions. And the
What are those going to be, Mr. Secretary? Because you say you thought it was wise to put it out, the proposal. I'm curious as to why, without any of the details that go into these very deductions that may have people rethink the deficits they see that are potentially could be created.
Well, on the personal side, we've said specifically we're going to eliminate all deductions other than mortgage interest and charitable contributions. That's a sweeping change, getting rid of lots of special interest, getting the federal government out of the business of subsidizing states. These are big changes and will raise a lot of revenues. So a big chunk of the costs of lowering the rate through simplification will be paid for by eliminating deductions.
Will be paid for by residents of California and New York. By the way, two places that you've called your hometown. What do you tell residents of those two states, for example, that have very high tax regimes? You can no longer deduct your state and local income taxes. And by the way, your economy may suffer significantly as a result.
Well, again, you're lowering the top rate. So those people may not get a tax break, and we're less concerned about creating a tax break for people on the high end, but they're getting a lower rate. So we're lowering the rate from 39.6 to 35%. I think there's a lot of people that would say, I'll give up my deductions for the lower rate.
Although the relative trade-off would be states with lower tax regimes would be more attractive for those high earners. You could see some migration from California to New York. I know it's a concern. Governor Cuomo has said this would be a death knell from New York. I mean, we've on and on from the politicians who are looking at that possibility. Yeah, they're very scared.
I don't think it's going to be a death for New York or California. These are economies that have done tremendous. I never thought I could move from New York to go to a higher tax place like California, but it's great. People like it here. There's a lot of innovation, and that's why people pay the taxes.
Back to this idea, though, of the details, which we don't have, except for you saying that we're going to eliminate all the deductions other than mortgage interest and charitable giving. Is that going to add up to enough in terms of the revenue being given up by cutting rates so low?
Well, we've been working on this for several months, and we have over 100 people in the tax department at the Treasury. They've been running lots of different scenarios. We are working very closely with the House and with the Senate. And the reason we didn't come out with more details is we want to work with the House and Senate and have a joint agreement. So when we release this plan, it's something that can pass Congress and the president can sign. So we have lots of different things, but we're working through the details with them.
So how long is it going to be till so many of us in the media and in the investor class just speculate on what it will eventually look like? When are we going to get those details?
You know, as fast as we can. So we are meeting weekly at the leadership level. We're meeting daily at the staff level at times, and we're all committed. We share similar views of what we're trying to accomplish, and we're committed to work as fast as we can on this.
This morning, Politico reported, quote, senior officials in the White House and Treasury wanted to keep working behind the scenes to create a more fully baked tax plan that would get support from Capitol Hill Republicans. Then early this summer, they could roll out a detailed blueprint that would address concerns from Speaker Ryan and others. Again, why the decision to release something that was so similar to what candidate Trump had talked about on the campaign trail, as opposed to going this route that apparently many people in your department wanted to?
Well, first of all, you know, I'm not going to comment on the specifics of the press, but that's just not the case. I've been working with the president on this for a very long period of time. We were in the Oval Office several times last week. The president is very focused on this, and we thought it was important that the American public wanted to know and should know an outline of what we're trying to do on tax and make it perfectly clear this is a big priority of this administration to create growth. And that's why we came out with the principles. And again, the details will come out when we turn this into a bill that can be signed.
In your first interview, which was on CNBC with my friends at Squawk Box, it was, I think, the 30th of November, you said there will be no absolute tax cuts for the upper class. They will be offset by deductions to pay for it. Do you stand by that?
I've been quoted on that a lot, and even during my confirmation hearings, I think that got named to the Mnuchin rule.
It was a very arresting statement, but people look at a 15% tax rate, what you're talking about in the three new brackets that you're going to have, and believe that most of these tax cuts will actually accrue to the wealthiest Americans.
Well, our focus is really on creating middle-income tax cut and simplifications. And as I said, a lot of the reduction on the high end is going to be paid for by eliminating deductions. So in many cases, people's effective tax rate won't go down. And that's something, again, this is about creating jobs, this is about creating economic growth. I mean, a very interesting statistic is on the business side, many studies show that over 70% of the cost of taxes are borne by workers. So by cutting the business rate, we're going to be able to have businesses put more money to work, create more jobs, and create better paying jobs.
There's been concern that as a result of the 15% applying to pass-throughs, to LLCs, to S-Corps, that a lot of people are going to be able to make themselves into those similar kinds of pass-throughs. I mean, I could go out and create David Faber Productions conceivably and benefit from a 15% rate. How do you make sure that doesn't happen?
You won't be able to do that.
Well, how are you going to stop me?
Well, we will have rules that it's clear that wage earnings will be taxed as wage earnings. So what we want to do is we want to create the opportunities for small and medium-sized businesses to have the benefit of the 15% rate. But what we're not looking to do is somebody who should be taxed at a 35% rate for wages can go out and set up an LLC to avoid that. That's something that we won't allow.
There's a lot of really smart tax lawyers out there. You and I know that. That's why we are in the place we are 30 years after, of course, tax reform originally passed. I mean, what gives you the confidence you can actually come up with language and or enforcement that's going to, by the law, prevent the likes of other people from creating these pass-throughs?
We've had, as I said, we've had a lot of people working on this issue. It's something we're very conscious of, and we're determined that when we come out with regulations, this is not going to be about tax avoidance. This is going to be about creating opportunities for small and medium-sized businesses. That's why I call it the business rate, not the pass-through rate.
Right. Why are you getting rid of the estate tax?
It's a double tax. It's a tax on debt. We believe that people who have worked hard, whether they have farms or they own businesses, should be able to not have to pay an additional tax when they die.
The deduction's $11 million right now. I looked at the statistics. I think it's about 50 family farms a year. 0.6% of all farms are affected by the estate tax, whereas 27% of the tax is paid by 0.1%, the highest 0.1% of Americans in terms of income and wealth. That doesn't sound necessarily like it's unfair.
Well, again, we believe in taxing people once, not taxing people twice. So to the extent that you've paid taxes during your lifetime, we think the estate tax is an unfair tax, and that's for every American.
Yeah, well, Gene Sperling, obviously different party, but an economic advisor in the last administration, says it's $269 billion over 10 years. You could pay 27 million people $10,000 over that 10 years as a tax break. Why not go that route?
Again, we'll create tax breaks for the middle class as part of this as well.
So you still are adhering to the Mnuchin rule, as you put it. You still are going to say that this is not going to benefit the upper class.
What I will say is the Mnuchin principle, as opposed to the Mnuchin rule, since we are going to work with the House and Senate on the ultimate plan. And again, that's the principle. Where it ends up will depend on how this turns into a bill. But the president's objective is creating a middle-income tax cut, not creating tax cuts for the high end.
And despite what are the doubts of some out there who follow GDP growth is what? It's productivity gains and hiring more people, right? That's the key to GDP growth. So how do we get from this tax plan, tax reform that so many corporate leaders have told me for so long we need, but how do we get from that and the individual to the kinds of growth that you're talking about? Make the connection for me and for the American public so we can fully understand how we're not going to generate enormous deficits.
Well, first let me just say, on the business tax, we have the most uncompetitive corporate tax system in the world. We have one of the highest rates, we tax on worldwide income, and we have deferrals. So it's not a surprise that businesses leave trillions of dollars offshore. By going to a territorial system and having a one-time tax on companies, they will bring back trillions of dollars. That's money that will be put to work here that they can invest in their businesses. Regulatory relief. There's many businesses that want to do things that are stuck and can't invest because of excess regulations. And fair trade. We're going to make sure that we have fair trade. Where people charge us 25% tariffs and we charge them nothing, that's not free and fair trade. So by a combination of these three things, we think we can unleash economic growth that's been held back.
You know, you're up against a pretty tough comparisons, and I only mention that because I checked. Apparently, no administration has seen a 0.8% increase. Let's call 2.2% GDP right now, being generous.
Yep.
So you're going to get to 3, you say, within 2 years. You just said that on stage. No administration's seen a 0.8% increase over the previous administration since 1981.
So we've got a lot of work to do, and we're determined to do it.
You do conceivably have a lot of work to do. And finally, Secretary Mnuchin, I mean, just wanted you to respond to Larry Summers in the Washington Post a couple of days back, writing an editorial. And I'm going to quote from it because I want to get your response to it. It was pretty damning. Some of the most difficult moments for any cabinet officer come when the president fails to respect the department's desire to do serious policy work, when political circumstances force the repudiation of his major past statements, and when he has to, out of loyalty, support absurd propositions. All three things, Secretary Summers wrote, happened to Mr. Mnuchin last week.
Well, look, Larry's a smart person, and I respect him, but I don't know why he's off making these statements. I've worked with the president. I've known him for over 15 years. I've worked with him for the last year. We're putting out this policy because this is something we spent a lot of time on, and we wanted to do, and we believe in. And the only reason we didn't put out all the details is because we're determined to work with the House and the Senate to turn this into a bill. And that's the reason why we didn't put out the details. So I wish Larry well, but he seems to like writing these editorials.
Yeah, yes, he does. He certainly likes to continue to have his voice. And finally, on the timeline itself, which you referenced, and working with the House, Bill Bradley, senator from New Jersey, who was also very instrumental in the last time we had tax reform, wrote an editorial. It's complicated. I mean, back then you had Rostenkowski, you had Packwood, you had President Reagan, you had Bill Bradley, you had so many different constituencies working for years. For years. What gives you the confidence you can get this thing done in months?
Well, it is complicated, and that's why we haven't had tax reform in 30 years, and it's time we have it. And I think one thing people understand is they want simpler taxes, they want competitive taxes, they want businesses that can invest and be competitive, and we're determined to do that.
Well, Secretary Mnuchin, we certainly appreciate your willingness to stop by and discuss it. Look forward to future conversations.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here at Milken with you.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.